Thank you. I really hadn't noticed, but they're almost parallel. One is right on top of the other. You can put that blue line, and it copies the red line. That is the growth in the American trade deficit. I want to just deal with this China thing quickly. We only have another 7 minutes here before we yield the floor. A year ago, this House, with both Republican and Democrat support, passed the China currency legislation that would require the Department of Commerce to put a countervailing tariff on imported Chinese goods if that currency manipulation were to continue. It went over to the Senate. It did not pass the Senate. This year, I should say this session, in 2011, the Senate passed a similar bill that would impose a countervailing tariff on Chinese goods as long as China maintained its currency manipulation. Came over to the House nearly 7 months ago. The Speaker and the Republicans have refused to take up that bill, the very same bill that a previous year we voted on bipartisan. This is an important piece of legislation because it would deal with this issue, two issues: the loss of American manufacturing jobs and the extraordinary trade deficit that is the export of American money to China. It is the policy behind many of the problems in the manufacturing sector. And it is policy changes that we have the power to put in place to reignite the American manufacturing sector, to rebuild it, and simultaneously put in place the ladders of success: education, research, entrepreneurship, support of the small businesses, all of those things that actually does reignite the American dream. Mr. Tonko, why don't you take the last 2 minutes and then we can wrap up.
Right. Well, what I hear here is that, you know, an election outcome is more important than the outcome for the American worker. And when political party benefit trumps the American worker, or trumps America's manufacturing base, and trumps hope into the future, that's a regrettable outcome. And what we need to focus on is the big picture. And if there's upset and upheaval because we're coming back from what was a very long and deep and painful recession, if that's upsetting news to a political scene, then we have lost the spirit that is required right now to bring America back and to reignite the American dream. That reigniting of the American dream, I believe, is what people want to see in action. They keep asking Washington to work together in a bipartisan, bicameral spirited way. Work in a way that will engage the policies and advocate for the resources that will build the hope back into the fabric of America's families, her individuals. And it's within our grasp. These ladders of success, these rungs of opportunity, they are a very achievable goal. We saw what happened when you ignore manufacturing. We saw what happened when you avoid sound agriculture policy. We saw what happened when you didn't get aggressive about an innovative agenda for energy generation, energy alternatives, energy efficiency. These are the things that people are asking us to do as leaders. They're saying, look, we asked you to lead, not to sit content with status quo, not to watch others pass us by, but our best days lie ahead of us. I'm filled with optimism about reigniting that American dream. I saw what happened. I saw what happened in my district when there was a commitment. And you know, the Erie Canal itself, that came about in response to tough economic times. And the leadership then said, let's do this. Let's wed the waters. Let's build a port on the coast out of New York. Let's wed it to the Great Lakes. Let's inspire progress. And look what happened. That response to troubling economic times drew upon the leadership. It produced the leadership. It gave it a face and it gave it a voice. And the message was, we're going to build. We're not going to cut our way to prosperity, cut our way to opportunity, cut hope. We're going to build hope. We're going to build and invest in America, her workers. Our best days lie ahead of us, Representative Garamendi, and thank you for the chance to join you this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Tonko. I notice that we still have a minute. I see my Republican colleagues are going to take the floor in a few moments, and if I recall last week when they did this, they said the answer lies in doing away with regulations. And clearly, regulations are a piece of the issue.
Were those regulations the same regulations we want to take away from Wall Street?
I would hope that they don't want to eliminate the regulations that we put in place to bring Wall Street under control. But regulations are a small part of the overall problem. There's a large number of other issues, some of which we've talked about today, others of which we will bring up as we discuss, for example, infrastructure, which will be our next piece. But those regulations that are in place today are there for the protection of key parts of the American economy. Worker safety, the pollution regulations so that our streams and rivers are not polluted, our air is not polluted, so there's not mercury and other carcinogens in the air, and that regulations dealing with the way in which business operates. Now, they can be modified, but be very, very careful if that is your only solution to the demise of the manufacturing sector, because it is but a small part of the overall issue. We've discussed many of the other parts here today. We ought to be, all of us, Democrat and Republican, alike in dealing with the twin problems of the trade deficit and the extraordinary and disastrous loss of manufacturing jobs. This is where the American middle class lost it, when the American manufacturing sector declined. We can rebuild it with wise public policies. Wise public policies are what we ought to be doing, rebuilding the American manufacturing sector and reigniting the American dream as we do that. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Tonko and I yield back.